David Seymour.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I proudly rise on behalf of the ACT Party in support of this budget because I want to keep Bill English as the Minister of Finance. Why? Because Bill English is pretty good, but also the alternative is terrible. And the people I represent are terrified of the idea that Grant Robertson becomes the Minister of Finance and introduces $2.7 billion of new expenditure and a 45% tax rate from $70,000 and up. Mr. Speaker, that means that on your marginal dollar, you're spending 45% on income tax. If you spend any of that, then you get anything that's left, you pay GST. If you work for a company or buy from a company, there's a company tax component to that. Mr. Speaker, under a Labor-led government, people would be spending more than half of their marginal income on taxes. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is a very good reason to keep Bill English and the National-led government on this side of the House and these guys on that side of the House. And, Mr. Speaker, it gets worse because New Zealand has a Donald Trump movement. It consists of the Labor Party, of New Zealand First and of the Green Party because, Mr. Speaker, have you noticed that whenever any issue involving foreigners, particularly wealthy and successful ones, enters the public arena for debate, they all do their bananas. Their positions on anything to do with any foreigner is absolutely interchangeable, whether it's the Green Party, who used to stand up for the environment, whether it's Labor, who used to have a proud liberal free trading tradition, or whether it's New Zealand First, for whom there's never really been any hope with international matters to start with. So, Mr. Speaker, it's important to keep the opposition out of there because they'd raise taxes and because they're congenitally xenophobic. But it's also important because they are out of touch. I have listened to the speeches from the opposition tonight, Mr. Speaker, and their speeches appear to be about another country, not about one of the top 5 fastest growing economies in the OECD, not about a country where more people think the country is going in the right direction than any of our Anglosphere peers, not about a country that has record-breaking employment and record-breaking industrial records in just about every sector of the economy. Mr. Speaker, the opposition would love that New Zealand was as bad as they say it is, but the problem for them is that it is not. Though, like many oppositions, Mr. Speaker, when they hear some bad news about the country, they say, Christ, it was even worse than we hoped for. Mr. Speaker, the problem for them is that it very seldom is that bad in New Zealand. They are out of touch. And there's more good news in this budget, Mr. Speaker. Partnership Schools Kura funding for another 7 of these schools that are transforming kids' lives for the better. Mr. Speaker, the opposition would like to tell you there's no demand for these schools. Well, just this year we had 26 organisations apply through a rigorous process to run more Partnership Schools Kura. And while I'm at it, I'd like to thank our coalition partners in the Māori Party for their staunch support of this policy because of what it's doing for Māori. I'd like to thank my colleagues in the National Party for their support of this policy. We are seeing 100% pass rates for university entrance for 100% Māori cohorts. This is a policy that is a success, and you just have to ask yourself, is the opposition really so worried that a small number of students for now, at a small number of schools for now, are going to fail? Or are they terrified that this policy is going to grow and eventually become the leading type of school in New Zealand and transform many more kids' lives for the better? They're not scared of this policy failing. They're worried that it's going to succeed because, Mr. Speaker, I think that partnership schools are going to go from strength to strength and transform more and more Kiwi kids' lives for the better. And I just want to salute the principals, the sponsors, the students, the parents who have bravely gone into this new model of education, despite all of the criticism that they cop from some of the most negative people in New Zealand, to actually make a difference in the way that education is done in this country. But, Mr. Speaker, those are the good things in this budget. The bad things are mostly things that were not in it. And the most important thing that was not in this budget is tax relief. And who would have thought that we voted out Helen Clark and Michael Cullen, the spendthrift Labor government of 9 years that had this country going into a recession before the rest of the world, at least Labor helped New Zealand lead the world in something, only to elect a national-led government that taxes you like a Labor government. 8 budgets in a row with no tax relief but for 1 year. We've had no tax relief since 2010, and the best that they can say to us is apopo, apopo, apopo. As they say in Maori, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. It shows the priority of this. It shows the priority of this government that there's always extra money for Stephen Joyce's corporate welfare, $700 million to flutter around the country and get lots of new photo ops for the government. But when it comes to the people that get up in the morning, get to work hard, earn the money and actually pay the bill, it's a popo, a popo, a popo. Tax cuts are always tomorrow. Well, Mr. Speaker, the ACT Party says that tax relief for the people that actually do the work and pay the bill should be the priority of a centre-right government. Otherwise, what's the point in voting out Labor just to get a national government that taxes you just as hard? Mr. Speaker, this budget could have very easily raised the top tax bracket where you pay the top income tax rate from $70,000 to $100,000, because the Prime Minister has admitted that very soon half of taxpayers will be in the top tax bracket. And to borrow a phrase from Michael Cullen, these aren't rich bricks, these are middle New Zealanders who are working hard and getting pushed by inflation into the top tax bracket in greater and greater numbers every year. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the biggest problem with this budget. There is no tax relief, even on the horizon, for the people who earn the money and pay the bill. And it shows this government's priorities that they're more interested in increasing spending on corporate welfare than they are in actually cutting taxes for the people that earn the money in the first place. One thing that is in the budget that I think is very regrettable, Mr. Speaker, is the tobacco tax increase. Mr. Speaker, if I thought that increasing tobacco taxes was going to improve the welfare of the poorest New Zealanders, then I would be here wholeheartedly supporting it. But, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the average smoker is very poor, highly likely to be Maori, smokes 10.6 cigarettes a day, and pays $2,600 in taxes on those cigarettes. Well, today's budget announcement is that that is going to raise to $3,800 a year. Mr. Speaker, it has not successfully reduced smoking rates. In the past 5 years, we have doubled smoking taxes and we've reduced the rate of smoking from 16.3% to 15%. That is simply not good enough. And what we could have done is legalise electronic cigarettes tax-free, and what that would have achieved is meant that people who choose to smoke at the moment could have got a $2,600, soon to be $3,800 tax cut in some of the poorest households in New Zealand. And it's a great shame that we didn't do that. But the biggest thing that is not in the budget, Mr. Speaker, is a sensible discussion about the sustainability of national superannuation. Mr. Speaker, my generation know there's no way we're going to get national super at 65, far off as it may be, Mr. Speaker. However, what really grates is that under the current government and the opposition, who frankly have been gutless on this issue, we're not even allowed to have a discussion about how that adjustment is going to happen as we go from 5 taxpayers per superannuitant down to only 2 taxpayers per superannuitant. Mr. Speaker, all we ask for is a conversation about how that transition will occur so that younger generations can actually plan and see what their retirement will look like. At the moment, the government has its head in the sand. So, Mr. Speaker, a good budget, a competent budget, a very good budget when you compare it to the alternative, a fabulous announcement that we will have more revolutionary partnership schools, kura-horua, but sad that we won't have tax cuts, that we're going to actually tax some of the poorest households in New Zealand harder through tobacco taxes, and that we can't have a grown-up conversation about the sustainability of national superannuation. With all of that, Mr. Speaker, I support this budget and I commend it to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.